We are continuing our series of art and symbols of St. John's Sanctuary, and we are continuing with the stained glass depicting the apostles. In particular, we're going to our last two evangelists, people who wrote the Gospels. And so over here we have St. Luke. And St. Luke, you'll see he's holding a book, which is one of the symbols of being an evangelist, because he wrote one of the books of the Bible about Jesus' life. And then down below him, you see that there is an ox. And that is a traditional symbol of St. Luke. And that is because one of the reasons why Luke is depicted or associated with an ox is because of his emphasis of Jesus bearing the burdens of people who are bearing heavy burdens, people who are most oppressed and who are most in need. In Luke's gospel, there are more stories about women, about people who are sick, about people who are poor than any of the other gospels. For example, Luke's gospel is the only gospel that has the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, this poor man who is outside of a rich man's house, who is neglected and eventually sees vindication. One of the stories that I want to share from that comes from Luke 5, which is very emblematic, I think, of Luke's emphasis on this beast of burden, as Christ as this beast of burden that helps us bear our heavy loads. And so this is the story of Jesus cleansing a leper. Once when Jesus was in one of the cities, there was a man covered with leprosy. When he saw Jesus, he bowed with his face to the ground and begged him, "Lord, if you choose, you can make me clean." Then Jesus stretched out his hand, touched him, and said, "I do choose. Be made clean." And immediately the leprosy left him. In that story, Jesus clearly states that his desire for people to be freed from their burdens, and he even goes so far as to touch this untouchable man, rendering which is a religious taboo, which is just a cultural taboo and a health taboo, and yet Jesus reached out and touched him. Over here, we have St. John the Evangelist, for which our church is named. And we see again, he has a book in his hand depicting that he's traditionally associated with the fourth gospel, which we call the Gospel of John, as being the author of that. And below we have the symbol that is usually associated with St. John, and that is of an eagle. One of the reasons why St. John is depicted or associated with an eagle is because of his, the way I've heard it phrased, is his high-flying theology. Whereas Matthew, Mark, and Luke, in various degrees, really emphasize that the divine became human, John really emphasizes that the human Jesus was divine. So there's lots of associations with Jesus, usually referring to his Father in heaven, really emphasizing that high-flying theology of Jesus, that he is the Christ who has a very clear divine origin. And so the quintessential passage that signifies that, I think, is the prologue of John, the very beginning, John 1. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He," that is Jesus, "was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it." And so this shows a little bit more about Jesus' divine nature. And so now we have seen the four evangelists and their various symbols that show their emphasis in the telling of the story of Jesus. And we'll continue next week with a couple more of the apostles.